Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm going to give you the opportunity to at least think in your mind or say in your heart, happy anniversary to me. It's my anniversary, my wedding anniversary, and also my oldest firstborn son's birthday. He was born on our third anniversary. So it's a special day in the Dexter family, and happy anniversary to my husband, Todd. Probably not listening because he's working very hard today. We'll go to dinner tonight. But I wanted to come back. Well, first of all, John Graves is going to join me in the next segment, and we're going to talk a little Texas politics and elections, and not really that specific about candidates and issues, but more about just the whole idea of being involved and encouraging the people of faith across Texas and across the nation to be involved in the political arena. That's been something this show has always been about. And certainly now, as we begin the run-up to the November elections, and some very important elections, as I'm sure all of you agree, we want to encourage that. He has got some wonderful technological innovation that he has pulled together, because he's kind of a techie guy. He's a great leader, and he's an attorney. But just to help get people involved and target Christians in their areas to vote. So we're going to talk to him about all of that. I know that you will. He's a very energetic guy, and I know that you will love that. And, you know, really getting the Christians engaged and motivated, giving them information, letting them know where candidates stand on the issues. You don't have to tell people who to vote for. You just give them the information. If they have a biblical worldview, if they understand the principles that God lays out, then usually it's sort of a no-brainer who you're going to vote for. But it's getting that information to people, because that's difficult sometimes, and that's what we try to do here at Point of View. We're different than a lot of media, but we do have a pretty broad reach across the nation. In this hour, of course, we concentrate on some Texas issues, because we've got a lot of a reach here in Texas during this hour. So stay tuned for that. That will be fun. And then a little bit later, I'm going to ask the question, should schools be reopening? And we're going to talk a little bit about the Dallas School District and what they're doing. They are reopening. They're giving at least the opportunity for that beginning in September. They moved it back 3 weeks. There was a story in today's Wall Street Journal about it, so we'll talk through that. And then last week, when I was here on Friday with Buddy Matthews and Kirby, we talked about Harris County and the fact that, last legislative session in Texas, we had, it was a big issue. It was really the biggest issue the legislature tackled. At least it had a lot of play beforehand, and people were really getting up in arms about the property taxes in the state of Texas, how high they are. And so they passed, the legislature passed a bill that would limit the increases of property tax that a locality or a county could impose on citizens to 3.5% increase before you had to get a vote of the people to increase it. So that lowered that cap from 8% down to 3.5%. And so that was that was not a lowering of property taxes, but it was at least a sign that they won't rise as fast as they have been. So great. But then along comes COVID-19, and some places like Harris County, which we discussed last Friday, decided to impose increases above 3.5%. I think theirs was 8%. Because it was a part of sort of an emergency waiver for a natural disaster that does exist in SB2, but it's kind of questionable whether COVID-19 falls under that. Well, guess what? I see today that Richardson City Council has now voted to allow a waiver of the Texas law restricting property tax increases of more than 3.5%, just what I just described. So this happened by unanimous vote in the Richardson City Council, and future councils will also be able to waive this 3.5% cap on increases without voter approval, as long as they can access the waiver of natural disaster declaration. So the law has put that into place, has allowed Richardson apparently to put that into place. So the city manager, Dan Johnson, said at an August 3rd council meeting, the objective is to help municipalities restore revenue after a period of economic strain, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, by increasing the tax rate by no more than 8%. It was supposed to be 3.5%. So, and this option apparently is also now available to future councils because of this declaration. And the city is projecting a decline in revenue for the next 2 years. Mayor Paul Volcker of Richardson said, I'm excited about the fact that we are doing a balanced budget this year and not raising a tax rate. This action is important in the context of local control so that next year's council and the year after that council has all the options on the table. So apparently they're not raising it this year, but they're enacting this waiver. It will expire after fiscal year 2022-23, according to council documents. And Republican leaders are mad about this, of course. Governor Abbott, he says that the exemption only applies to physical damage, like from a natural disaster. That's what it's called, a natural disaster waiver. It's not supposed to be economic damage, as in COVID-19 fallout. And Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General, also issued an opinion reiterating that nothing in the statute describes levels of qualified property damage. None of that. That's what it's about, property damage. This does not evidence an intent on the part of the legislature to address non-physical damage to property in this exemption. So it looks like we're going to have a battle. And apparently a couple of the authors of SB 2, Representative Dustin Burrows from Lubbock and also Paul Betancourt of Houston, they have a plan to reprimand any localities who choose to utilize this loophole, and they're misusing it, they say. So they may actually try to penalize them by forcing a lower property tax rate on any locality that circumvents the new limits this year. So that just goes to show that sometimes you pass something that seemed to be somewhat of a victory here in Texas, but there will always be city bureaucrats and county bureaucrats that will try to get around it. It's all about making sure that you can raise taxes when needed, when desired. And so, we're going to be fighting those battles, I guess, for years to come. This is what Representative Burrows said. He said, as long as they're pushing, or if they're successful, I will push for a like-kind decrease in the voter approval rate for 2021 and 22 to offset these hikes. The city of Dallas also considered this option, but they voted it down overwhelmingly. This is a decision which Betancourt and Burrows applauded right afterwards in a joint press release. So Dallas did it right. It's supposed to lower the taxes and the future tax increases on Texans to help them as their property values rise, especially. And that battle will continue. Next up, John Graves will join me. Stay with us.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Etta Mill argues that if social media wants to play doctor, they should prepare to be sued for malpractice. He has a point. It involves the frequent debate about the effectiveness of using hydroxychloroquine. Its use got political once the president talked about it during one of the coronavirus task force briefings. Doctors and researchers can debate how safe and effective it might be, and we can leave that debate for another conversation. The real question is why social media would pull a video about it. Do these social media outlets have doctors evaluating medical procedures? And when they argue that using this drug is dangerous, aren't they speaking outside of their expertise? Last month, a video from a press conference of doctors was censored because one of the doctors said that she had treated over 300 COVID-19 patients using the therapy, including vulnerable patients who all improved. Facebook pulled the video that already had 14 million views. YouTube and Twitter followed suit, arguing that it violated their social media platforms. They're free to pull a video, but the social media explanations for why they did so raise important questions. They said that the medical testimony in the video could not be allowed because, number one, the treatment doesn't work, and number two, the treatment is dangerous. The obvious question to ask is whether these censorship decisions are being reviewed and approved by actual physicians. If the video is true, then other patients with the virus could be saved by the medical testimony. If the information in the video is false, then the correct response would be a rebuttal from licensed physicians and medical researchers. We have come to expect censorship on social media platforms. Censoring medical information and testimony from doctors and physicians is one step further. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. My next guest is John Graves, and John is a husband and father and also a business owner, attorney, ordained pastor, and he runs a digital technology company with partners. These qualifications make him perfect to be the CEO of Vision America, which has been around a while. But John just took over a few years ago. It's an association of churches that mobilizes pastors and people of faith to influence the culture by community action for spiritual awakening. And John, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be with you again.
It's really good to have you. It's been a little bit too long, but I think it gets on my radar screen when elections are coming. We've got one coming. The presidential election certainly gets the most attention, but we need to be paying attention all the way down the ballot, don't we?
Exactly right. There's 12 to 14 Senate races that are going to matter, which obviously deal with judges and a whole host of other issues. You know, most of the focus every 4 years is on the White House, but every 2 years, all 435 congressmen are up. In Texas, we have 7 U.S. congressmen that could go either way for either party. And then there's a whole host. There's easily 11 Texas House races that are within the margin of error. And so people forget how much is at stake. And Texas, you know, most of the nation historically thought, oh, well, Texas is safe and this state is safe, and things are shifting dramatically. And so our goal and our job is to try to wake people up, make them aware, educate them, and get them involved.
Famously, of course, and everywhere, even in the streets of many of our big cities in the country, we're seeing demands for all kinds of socialist programs and policies. Mm-hmm. And you think that will never fly in Texas, but there are forces pushing that type of thing here too, aren't there?
Oh, it's unbelievable. Yeah, people forget that Texas is about 30 million people. 10 years ago, it was about 20 million. So one-third of the state wasn't here 10, 12 years ago. And they're moving in, rapidly from, California and the Northeast. And so they're escaping bad socialist policies. But then when they come here, some of them, not all of them, want to bring those with them.
Crazy. So they're coming for a better life, and they're going to bring their policies.
Exactly.
Well, John, that's
the
why
policies
that are destructive.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because Vision America is one of the solutions for that, especially for the Christians that move in. They may come from liberal areas. They may not even get really what has been behind many of our economic successes here. And certainly in some places like California, where many are coming from, you've got some really drastic anti-family policies. And so you sort of get used to it, even as a believer, I think, sometimes. And so we need to educate them, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. That's our passion. To me, what most people don't understand is even in a presidential, which is the highest turnout there is, almost half the people don't vote, including Christians, including believers. And so it's worse than that in an off-year election, like 2018 or, in 2 years. But our job is to motivate people, educate them, and let them make the difference. The church is really supposed to exercise her voice and be the salt and light to influence. And the enemy is not, a political party, and the Savior is not a political party. But if the church wakes up and gets people engaged, that's what can change the culture for the better of everyone.
So I know you have a big network of pastors, and a lot of pastors, I'm sure that they are of varying degrees of engagement, because some pastors don't want to flout the law, and they think they are by talking politics. And others they feel that they shouldn't be telling people what to do in the political arena, but you really don't have to, do you? All you have to do is educate them.
Yeah, a lot of times the pastors forget. I'm an attorney and I'm a pastor, and so I've spoken to 7,000 pastors in mostly swing states in the last 3 cycles, and what I do is just simply tell them the truth and tell them, you don't give up your constitutional rights as a citizen just because you're a pastor. And there's this false thinking out there that we try to expose, that there's a separation between church and state. The church is supposed to influence the state. It's the whole foundation of the nation. And even when there's a mistake in the nation or a battle in the nation, of Revolutionary War, that's how slavery was ended. The church woke people up and said, we got to stop this, and started the process to correct even the wrongs that are in the nation. And so a lot of pastors, some of it's their once they know the truth, they get involved, but some of it is they don't understand the whole political system. And there's a fascinating study, you'll love this, that I was talking to a pastor friend of mine who was reading through the times in the lead up of the Civil War, and the churches up north were preaching, everyone's created in God's image, and we should, if we can free our brothers, we should do it. The churches in the South, the pastors were preaching, it's our right. The Bible has slaves. Do you know what all of the border state sermons were in the lead up to the Civil War?
What?
The church should not be involved in politics.
Really?
And so what happens is we have a whole nation full of border state churches that are saying, look, I've got people that disagree about these things, and it's complicated, sometimes, but we don't stay away from things just because they're complicated, and it's safe. I don't lose, a donor if I start talking about life or marriage or religious freedom or some of these things, poverty, prison reform, biblical issues, Israel, that matter.
There's so many that matter. I know that you have a project, and this is what piqued my interest a couple of weeks ago when I saw this, called Million Voices. What is that?
Yes. Million Voices, we started studying. We began our work with Vision America in pastors, but we began to see, why are people not voting? And the number one reason is they think their vote doesn't matter. So I thought, you're just one person. I used to feel like this, but what if 1 million new people that don't normally vote, that aren't registered, we could find them that are aligned with biblical issues, with our guiding truths, with our vision, and say, look, you're not alone. Your voice may be small, but if there's 1 million of you that speak up, it can make a dramatic change. A lot of people don't realize the last presidential election, there were 138 million votes cast, and it was decided by Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, 77,000 votes. That's 0.0005. That's how tiny these margins are in a lot of these states. And so our whole heart was to try to find people who are faith voters. A lot of them are freedom voters. They're aligned with religious freedoms and those type of things. And we're now over 350,000 people who are saying, I pledge to vote this year. I am standing with you, and I'm going to now make my voice heard. And we believe that could make the difference from the White House to the Senate to the House to the state races, basically just believers finally getting engaged in the process. And this is what I tell people. We don't live in a emperor-run country where, like Nero, our kids are being fed to lions if they recant Jesus. We get to elect who governs us, and we're not showing up. So we're just trying to get people to exercise their constitutional freedom to try to, everybody complains about how bad it is, but the answer is let's go improve it.
We're getting a little interference in your audio, so I don't know if it's where you are or if we maybe there's a break coming up, we can call you back.
Okay.
And so,
Sure.
Right now it sounds good. So let me just ask you one more question, and then we'll try to work on that during the break. But I noticed, and I think this is because you're a techie guy, that you have a project called digital door knocking. What is that?
Yes. So that is the technology behind what we're doing with Million Voices and Vision America. We have a license to use that, and it allows us. In the old days, people would go door to door, and they would knock on the door and try to see if somebody would answer and get their issues or get their stance or see if they would be willing to register to vote. Well, now we actually have the trademark with the U.S. Patent Office on this. Digital door knocking is getting them to answer that digitally, getting them to answer the surveys on their polls on their phone, on their computer, their tablet, whatever. But they're giving us a lot more information than you normally get when you do the old school. Well, as we began to do that, it started going really, really well, and the kind of shocking COVID crisis lockdown, it didn't stop digital door knocking. Yeah, it was wonderful. So it has really been instrumental because everyone is carrying a phone just about these days, a smartphone, and they can answer those things easily, more discreetly, and then it's up to them. They can tell us as little or as much as they want, and once we know what's most important to you, maybe for you it's religious freedom or it's poverty, prison reform, pro-life, biblical marriage, parent choice in education, Supreme Court justice, whatever it is for you, we can then communicate with you based on what's important to you.
That's called targeting, and it's a great concept. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Republicans are normally very good at a ground game, and they have actually started that, but I think COVID has interrupted it. So digital door knocking sounds like a great idea right about now. We will have more with John Graves, Vision America, right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Penna Dexter.
I was accused recently of being more of an action person than anything else, and I do think I am motivated by action and encouraging people to take action on things that are very important to them and to the culture and to the Lord. And so I think that's what you're about, John Graves. John is head of Vision America, and you've got tools for people that are like me, that are action-oriented.
Yes, we do. If you go to millionvoices.org, you can see how many people have signed up, but you can click on to see if you're registered. You can click on to get a voter guide. You can educate yourself on some of the top 10 issues that we call guiding truths. And then we help people once they sign that pledge on millionvoices.org, and we get them, here's early voting, here's your location, here's what you need to know. And so we just try to, I say, put the cookies on the lowest shelf. It's a lot of times people are confused. It's a complicated process, and all of us, have challenges knowing who to trust and who to believe. And so we're nonpartisan, so we're a 501c3. We don't endorse or oppose a candidate, but we will educate you on the top issues of those candidates.
John, I know that you're based in Texas, but this is a nationwide effort, isn't it?
It is, yes. We're live right now in 20 different states, all the swing states. If it's a Senate, toss-up or lean, if it's a presidential, that's where we mostly work, and then sometimes in House races. But Texas is home. We got good news, in Texas, because there's people that are starting to wake up. And so there's good things coming, I believe, but it's, we've got to be involved.
We do. Now, there's this complacency factor here, because as you mentioned, we're traditionally conservative, but we've got to watch out, don't we?
That's right. And a lot of people, if you study the reasons people don't vote, one, they think their voice doesn't matter. Two, they're too busy. I know that seems crazy, but the number three reason is I'm tired of holding my nose and picking between the lesser two evils. Well, until Jesus is on the ballot, there's always going to be failed candidates, and the biggest challenge that's hard for people to understand is those are picked in primaries where 5 or 10% show up. There's 30 million people who live in Texas. The governor, the last election cycle, was chosen by 5% of the population, 1.5 million people. And so way less than 10% of those who could be engaged. And that's why on both sides of our two-party system, which it is what it is, we wish it was different, but that's how the system works. And the way to change it is to get us involved.
John, sometimes people know who they're going to vote for president, Senate, even Congress, maybe even their state legislature, but they start getting down to judges and things like that. Do you go that far down in your research?
We usually don't. What we usually do is link out to other organizations depending on what state we're in, and there's other resources. They're not C3. iVoter Guide is a great one that I think they go down. There's nothing perfect out there, but they're a good source.
Yes,
there are other states that do it, and they can give you more information. What we found is that pastors are the second most influential person to decide if a person's going to vote and get engaged. The one person who's more influential is a close friend who knows about politics. And I can't count the number of times I do it too. I talk to my friends, hey, I know about this and this, but what about that one? Well, if they've looked into it, that's what people trust. So we're trying to turn people into education, activists and educators. And so part of what we ask people to do on millionvoices.org is not just pledge to vote, and I can explain to you why we do the pledge, but pledge to bring your non-voting friends. So if you vote all the time, a lot of your listeners may be what they call high propensity voters. They're voting a lot. You're the number one person, not the media, not the candidate, not the parties, not the PACs. You are the number one person who could bring 10 or 20 of your non-voting friends, and if you influence them, send them the voter guide that we give for free. You're the one that has a bigger influence than any of the rest of the people do.
Yes, and I think a lot of our listeners are probably those ones that everybody else calls to get information on who to vote for. And here's a great resource of information. And sometimes your friends from other states are calling you, and they're wanting to know. So you got to have some answers here.
Yes.
John, talk about voter registration, because that's another tool that's nonpartisan. You can register everyone.
That's right. Yes, and if you sign up on our pledge, we developed a tool where no matter what state you're in, if you sign it up, you put your name and your address, date of birth, and then we will send you the actual voter registration form. We'll email it to you automatically. It doesn't cost anything. We'll text it to you as well. And then all you have to do, all the work's done for you. You don't have to go find the form, get the form. You just sign it, put your, driver's license or social, and you mail it, because we're not going to do the last step of that. and then you mail it to the Secretary of State. Now, in Texas, Florida, a lot of states, you have 30 days before the election. So we have 83 days until this election. So you have to back up and say, I've only got little more than 50 days to get registered, or I'm not going to get to vote. If you're in Michigan, Minnesota, other states, they can register all the way, same-day registration until the very, very end. And so we kind of give the state rules of where you live when you fill out the application.
And that's just a great thing to do in your church, to organize voter registration. That's something that you can really make a great impact. Well, John, I want to ask you about the potential for fraud in mail-in voting, because we've got we're trying to make clear to people that there's kind of two ways. There's the absentee voting where you apply for the ballot, and there's some security that is built in. The state of Florida has that, so they have a robust mail-in voting, but it's absentee voting, really. That's the principle, whereas Nevada just passed something that, basically, as in some of the other states like California, they mail a ballot to everyone, and the ballots go to people that aren't even registered, that may not even be alive anymore.
Yep.
And that is a potential for disaster, isn't it?
It's huge. It's a big, big problem, and it's going to be worse this year than ever because of the COVID, and everybody's changing the rules. Michigan, you couldn't register online. Now you can. Colorado is another state, like you're talking about Nevada. 100% of people on October 12th will be mailed the ballot, and it's ripe for fraud. They had this in Orange County with the ballot harvesting where 1 million people voted, but 250,000 showed up on the last day, and it basically they did a study I've seen where they called all these people who supposedly voted and interviewed them, and they didn't even ask them who they voted for. They just said, how did you vote? Did you go in person? Did you mail in? 11% of the people who showed up on the roll said, I didn't vote this time.
Wow.
And so it is, and there was another story that just broke. 800,000 what look like government mail-in ballots were sent to people by a leftist organization, and people are confused, and so it's going to be.
So the point there would be you vote on the fake ballot, and then your real ballot doesn't count.
That's right, and you don't know. They're only sending it to certain people, right? So they're only sending that to individual people. A lot of people, I like what you just said, if you request the absentee ballot, depending on where you are, Florida's got a good system, Texas, if somebody's sending you something, you need to be more cautious unless you're the one that signed up for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other part of this is the way we've done it forever with walking to the polls. I mean, we have early voting. That can also be problematic, but it's much better than this mail-in systems. Yep. And states like Texas are expanding their period of early voting. So, I'm just going to get out there and wear my mask and walk into the polling place.
You bring up a very valid point, because the big risk. A lot of the more biblical conservative people are the older population that are more susceptible to this virus, and so there is a serious concern. But a lot of them they understand what's at stake in the nation. They understand. They see the cultural war going on, and so a lot of them are going to take the risk. And I do think that's the safest. And 70% in states like Texas and Florida vote early, the 2 weeks. Now in Texas, it's going to be 3 weeks. And so I could see that being 80% or more this time.
Well, if you're worried about COVID, you can still distance a little more if you vote early.
Right. That's right. Yep.
Well, we're all going to grocery stores. Most of us are.
Yes, I know. I'm a big early vote person. It's just one more reason to deter people from going or to create a lot of confusion. And our hope is if we get the right people, our goal is to get 1 million people or more by the end of this that normally are not voting, or if you are voting, you're pledging to bring new non-voters. And so that's the heart behind millionvoices.org, is to get people to pledge. And the reason we do that, Stanford did a study in the Obama-Hillary Clinton race and found the conclusion was he was getting people to pledge to vote at all his rallies, and she was not. So we studied that with evangelicals and Judeo-Christian kind of worldview voters, and it is exactly 75 to 85%. If you pledge to vote, it will shift and change. That you don't normally do it, but it matters. And the more people that get involved, the better the solutions are. We're not gonna fix this in one election or with one candidate. Our hope is not in those things. but we do need to stay involved and bring others. That's the big thing this year, I think, is who else can you bring?
John Graves, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to millionvoices.org. You can find out about the voter pledge, the voter guides, and all the rest. Thank you, John, for being with me. God bless you and your work. We'll be back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. We are going to concentrate the bulk of the rest of this program today on education. And the reason is because there's, right now there's a boiling controversy and the lines are moving back and forth and all around about reopening public schools and private schools, colleges, and all the way down to pre-K. And so we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to call in, too, in the next hour early on to let me know your opinion. Do you think schools should reopen, especially the little kids, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds? Should they be back in school this fall? And, some people are going to say, well, it depends on where you are and whether the COVID numbers are high or not. So we'll talk about that. But it's very interesting because today's Wall Street Journal has a piece out about Dallas on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Dallas superintendent makes wrenching choices that administrators face nationwide. And you have to remember that these school administrators who are ultimately making the decisions is usually the superintendents of schools. Dallas is a big district, so this guy's got a big job. Michael Hinojosa. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I probably should have looked that up before the program. But he's the superintendent of Dallas schools, and he stepped on a landmine, says the Journal, while laying plans to reopen his 153,000 student district amid the coronavirus pandemic. He wanted teachers instructing from classrooms, even if the students weren't there. He wanted the teachers there. He thought that would be better. He said it's better because it's unprofessional if their teachers' kids are in the background yelling and the dogs are barking and husbands are walking back and forth or wives are walking back and forth. So the teachers did not agree for the most part. I'm sure they're not a monolith. But this article in the Journal says the teacher's response was swift and clear. His approach would gamble with their lives as COVID-19 runs rampant in the area. And they cited the state of Arizona where a teacher died recently, and she was back in sort of the same type of situation, back with the teachers but not the students. So Dr. Hinojosa changed his stance after consulting a county leader. He would now allow teachers to apply to work from home if they had reliable internet and minimal distractions. His experience, says the Wall Street Journal, shows the heart-wrenching decisions facing superintendents throughout America as they try to educate children while navigating an array of opposing forces. Few are stable. They're moving. And, some parents have been kind of on pins and needles, too, all summer, wondering if their kids would be back in school, wondering if they even wanted their kids to be back in school. And so lines are moving and virus numbers are changing. And, then there's the science, which we'll talk about in a minute. But these superintendents have to balance changing statistics that project the potential loss of learning and potential loss of lives. And we all can look back to the beginnings in March of closing of schools and the beginnings of online education. It happened so fast. And a lot of the schools never felt they really got organized enough to get compliance from all the students. And so it was really a loss for some students, many students across the country. Some schools did very well at it, but a lot of times those were schools that were already a little bit, had some online learning set up already, and it made it easier for them to move into that. A superintendent's decision, says the Wall Street Journal, can affect the economy, determining if parents head back to work or need to be home helping their children learn. And I do know that many parents made quick arrangements or were locked down themselves and are now back at work. So the schools not reopening is a big problem for them because they have to either find a place or spend money or ask their boss that if they can work from home or not work, lose their job. So it's affecting whether people go back to work, which affects the economy and affects families. Flexibility, says Dr. Hinojosa, is the name of the game because things are changing in real time, sometimes by the hour. He is among the holdouts among his peers across the country. He has not given up on offering both in-person and remote learning, despite more districts locally and nationally announcing they will start online only. And there's really a split. And I think if you have a conversation with your friends, you're going to be probably split on this issue because people have different opinions, different fears, and different needs. And so that's why I will open up the phones after the top of the hour and let you weigh in on your opinion on that. One thing that's happened is teachers' unions have encouraged or at least have not ruled out something that's called safety strikes over reopening. In other words, the schools may be planning on reopening, and some teachers, actually, maybe the teachers are ready to go back, but the unions are favoring not opening to protect all teachers. Large districts like Chicago and Los Angeles have scrapped in-person learning plans totally for now. The Dallas district, though, released its reopening plan last month. They said there could be changes based on input from parents, teachers, and circumstances with the virus. And guess what? All of those came in and just confused the situation even more. So this superintendent, I think, has done a decent job in moving forward, trying to take into consideration all of that. He did move the start date from August 17th which would have been next week, to September 8th. So 3 weeks out to give them a little bit more time to figure things out. But one parent said, if I have to go back to work, they have to go back to school. That's the situation that a lot of parents are put in right now. And the Dallas Alliance AFT Teachers Union wants only online learning until January. That could be a problem for a lot of people, including children who need to be in school with their peers at some point. They want at least the first 8 weeks of school online, and then under a steady decline in confirmed COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations, they would think about allowing in-person school. While Texas teachers unions don't have the legal right to strike, they can make life rough. That's what the superintendent says. So he tries to work with them as best he can. Saying that we're going to listen to the parents, we're going to listen to the teachers, and we're going to especially listen to the science. And a lot of the science, of course, now is showing that COVID doesn't spread as readily among kids, especially the younger the children are. And I think the younger the children are, the harder online learning is for them. So that's why early education seems to make a lot of sense, at least to some schools. But you have to have a remote learning program in place also because of people that might end up needing to be quarantined or people that just are too afraid to send their kids or to come back to school as a teacher. Many districts, says the Wall Street Journal, including Dallas, say remote learning will be more rigorous this time around and similar to what a student would receive on campus. Well, we'll see. We will see. But it has been a balancing act, and that's the challenge that we see for these school leaders. And, this superintendent in Dallas here has the right idea, though. He says the kids have got to keep on learning, and that's really true. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the program. Next up, we will take your calls, 800-351-1212. We'd like to know if your kids are going back to school pretty soon. If you favor that, if you don't have kids, if you favor just keeping it online or some hybrid of the two, that's something that we want to talk about. We're also going to talk about what is being taught in these schools. What kind of indoctrination is taking place? Laurie Higgins from the Illinois Family Institute will join us to do that, so stay with us.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information. about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. The weather's hot, but this is the time that a lot of people across the country think about going back to school, getting ready. And boy, is it different this year. Some people don't even know if they are going back to school or not. They don't know whether their kids are going to be going into the schoolhouse or sitting behind a computer and trying to do their lessons there. They don't know about the accountability. They don't know how long online learning might last and when their kids will actually be able to go back to school so they can have some sanity or go to work, which they've been waiting to do. There's so much at stake, and we are going to spend a lot of time on the program today talking about education in various ways. Later in this segment, in this hour, Laurie Higgins from the Illinois Family Institute will join me. She writes about education and other issues, and she's also does some radio commentary. And she's talking about indoctrination in the classroom, really at the college level all the way down, and how that has become basically just a fact of life in this country, in our public schools and universities, and we need to be aware of it. So we will talk with her later in the program. During this half hour, I'm going to ask for folks listening to call in, because I want to know what you think about going back to school. What about in-person school? Is that okay with you? Or is it okay if the kids are still learning online? What about your kids? Are they going back? We just want to get a feeling from parents and even teachers across the country about getting back into school. And later, Lindsey Burke from Heritage Foundation will join me, and she's been studying education for years. She's an expert in policy, and she thinks there's some real opportunities right now with what COVID-19 has done to education. We will talk with her about pandemic pods, reopening schools, and other things. So you don't want to miss that. And then Tim Winter from Parents Television Council is going to join me. So this is a program that's of great interest to parents. I do want to mention a couple of other things that have been happening. I'm sure Kirby referred to them yesterday, but certainly the mayhem continues across the nation. It's interesting because in Portland, where the protests could have been the worst in the country, and of course the left blamed it on the fact that there were federal agents trying to quell things. And some people, including leaders in government like Congresswoman Pelosi, saying that the reason it was violent was because there were federal troops there. And so they left. President Trump took them out. July 31st, the chaos ended as soon as they left. That's a statement from Portland. But so much for that. Over the weekend, Portland police were forced to declare 2 riots. And it was as bad or worse than ever. And another city that was bad over the weekend, so it's bad a lot of weekends, is Chicago. Sunday night, hundreds of looters ransacked stores across the Magnificent Mile, which is one of America's premier commercial streets. People could, and they'd planned for it because people could be seen throwing merchandise into rental trucks and other large vehicles before driving away. It was an opportunity. I think some people probably had a leftist message, but a lot of people just wanted to get out there and get some stuff. And this is what still continues to take place across the nation. Also, still no agreement on some kind of COVID relief. It's still out there, and perhaps it will never happen. Maybe it will. But they are returning to the negotiating table. The White House took action, though, because there was such a wide gap between the amount of money the Democrats wanted and the amount of money the White House wanted. $3.5 trillion is what the Democrats wanted, and they're really standing pretty firm on some of their negotiating items. For instance, they wanted the kitchen sink, but including funding for cash for states and cities for things really to kind of help them recoup from some of their terrible leftist policies that they've been enacting and basically foisting on the people for decades. Actually, foisting. Some of the people love it because it's a lot of giveaways. And these are the types of things that the Democrats had in their bill. They wanted COVID money to go to try to help bail out some of the states and cities. So the Republicans in the White House are having none of that. And their program was about $1 trillion, but now it's even getting less because we're seeing that there's a lot of money left from the first few relief packages that hasn't been spent yet. So there could be a lot of moving around of money. And meanwhile, the president has actually issued 4 executive actions. He's certainly being pilloried for it. But, we've talked a lot here on the program about the unemployment that's coming from the federal government that was adding $600 a week for to unemployment that states was offering, and this was stopping some people from going back to work. So it's not being abolished, but the White House wants to dial it back a little bit to about $300 a week, and the states can provide another $100 if they want to. So that's part of the executive action that the president has actually issued. Also, he wants to suspend the payroll tax, and there are people that agree and disagree about that, but that would give people a 6.2% increase temporarily in their pay if they're going back to work. So it's rewarding people that are working. Avoiding evictions, ways to actually avoid people being thrown out of their homes at this time, even if they can't pay the rent, and assistance with student loan payments. So there were 4 actions by the president, sort of pulled a little bit of the air out of the Democrats' balloon. And it's a good election, I think, move just to show that the administration is interested in helping people that are affected by COVID-19. But it's going to add to our debt. Our children are going to pay for this. And there's going to be lots of controversy whether some of this is actually legal or constitutional. So those battles are taking place. But again, let me open up the phones, 800-351-1212. We do want to talk about school openings. And one thing I mentioned in the last hour, if anyone was listening on sort of our Texas hour, was teachers' unions and how much influence they are attempting to have on whether or not schools reopen. They think it's, in a sense, an opportunity to squeeze more money from taxpayers, and they're making some demands that, if you look at those, you scratch your head because some of them have nothing to do with education. For instance, one of the demands for reopening schools is by the American Federation of Teachers, led by Randy Weingarten, is support for our communities and families, including canceling rents and mortgages, a moratorium on evictions, which the president's already kind of doing, providing direct cash assistance to those not able to work who are unemployed, and other critical social needs. Another one, and this does have to do with school, a moratorium on new charter or voucher programs or standardized testing. Those are good things that give parents choices. Lindsey Burke will talk with us about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'd love to hear from you. Are your kids going back to school? Do you think the kids should go back to school in person? Should it stay online forever or for a time? We'll talk about it all right after this. Stay with us for more of Point of View.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Mill argues that if social media wants to play doctor, they should prepare to be sued for malpractice. He has a point. It involves the frequent debate about the effectiveness of using hydroxychloroquine. Its use got political once the president talked about it during one of the coronavirus task force briefings. Doctors and researchers can debate how safe and effective it might be, and we can leave that debate for another conversation. The real question is why social media would pull a video about it. Do these social media outlets have doctors evaluating medical procedures? And when they argue that using this drug is dangerous, aren't they speaking outside of their expertise? Last month, a video from a press conference of doctors was censored because one of the doctors said that she had treated over 300 COVID-19 patients using the therapy, including vulnerable patients who all improved. Facebook pulled the video that already had 14 million views. YouTube and Twitter followed suit, arguing that it violated their social media platforms. They're free to pull a video, but the social media explanations for why they did so raise important questions. They said that the medical testimony in the video could not be allowed because, number one, the treatment doesn't work, and number two, the treatment is dangerous. The obvious question to ask is whether these censorship decisions are being reviewed and approved by actual physicians. If the video is true, then other patients with the virus could be saved by the medical testimony. If the information in the video is false, then the correct response would be a rebuttal from licensed physicians and medical researchers. We have come to expect censorship on social media platforms. Censoring medical information and testimony from doctors and physicians is one step further. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
People can be forgiven if they're confused about whether or not it's safe to reopen schools in person. But I think most people believe that it's better for children to be at school, at least under normal circumstances. But here are just a couple of headlines from certain publications. For instance, this comes from Scott Gottlieb, who used to be, he's with the American Enterprise Institute now, but he was commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration. He's written a lot about this. He says schools can open safely this fall. He said this on July 13th, so about a month ago. And I think he still stands on that position. And then the case for reopening schools out of the Wall Street Journal. School closures threaten kids more than COVID-19, pediatricians say. And then Lindsey Burke, who will be joining us later, more than 20 countries are reopening schools. The U.S. should take note. And a lot of the statistics out of those countries is showing us that it's not readily spread by children. And so some of the worries about children spreading to teachers, I'd say that's one of the biggest worries and the one that the teachers' unions are definitely capitalizing on at this point. And then this one I posted. I'm a nurse in New York. Teachers should do their jobs just like I did. Very convicting, I think, for teachers who are a little afraid to go back. I know they all have good reasons, but they're teachers, and that's what they signed up for. Ladies and gentlemen, we're taking your calls on this issue of reopening schools. Let's go to Steve now in Mississippi. Hi, Steve. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, thank you for taking the call.
What are your thoughts?
Well, I would like to let you know, first off, I am an RN of 25 years, and I just so happen to work in a COVID unit. So if there's any question you'd like to ask me, go right ahead. But I can fill you in on all the small things that you may not be aware of. So,
Yes, I would like to ask you, but first tell me what you think about schools.
I know several retired school teachers. I know some active school teachers, and as I said, I am an RN. I do not think that we are up to our game on testing right now, in that we have the capacity to only do 700,000 tests a day. We need to be doing 1 million. Half of that 700,000 is a rapid test, of course. That's what every school needs to be outfitted with, is a rapid test, and they need to be testing children and parents before they're ever sent into schools. Moreover, the other 350,000 that take 3 or 4 days, if a test takes more than 3 or 4 days, it's worthless, because the person who's been tested has been exposed. So we really got to get that rapid testing game up, which is not going to happen until the fall.
So do you not think that schools should open in person until we have a better capability for this rapid testing?
The probability of children dying is extremely high. I'll put it to you just like that. It can be spread by children. It can
well, wait, the numbers say that the probability of children dying is very low.
There's been 100 children die in the United States so far. Which one do you want to be yours?
Yeah, I don't want any to be mine, but there are real trade-offs here. Listen, tell me,
these are children, and these are schools. This is a school, it's a year, whatever. I'm an RN. I don't want a floor full of children. Before June, facilities I have worked at, our cases have doubled now. We have people in ICU on ventilators. We have every age. I have coworkers that have come down with it on high flow vapotherm oxygen.
What about you? Did you come down with it?
I have come down with it in February, yes. And I could not be tested because there was no testing available for me.
Yeah, that was really unfortunate.
And as an RN and as a medical person, I told my friends not to get near me. Even those that got within 10 feet of me got it and came down with it.
Okay, yeah, I know. It's very contagious. Listen, thank you that was a good way to start.
This is your opportunity to ask me some more questions.
Yeah.
I got all the answers.
Well,
go ahead.
I've got to take some more calls because we've taken a lot of the segment, but I do appreciate your expertise, and I also just want to say thank you. You're on the front lines of this.
I am.
So God bless you, Steve. Thanks for calling in. So that's a good way to start with someone who's seen it. And, I think with the numbers, though, what we're hearing from European and other countries that have never closed or have gone back is that there's it's low. Now, you cannot stop every single case. You can't. And so, the trade-offs we have to make are, what happens to all the kids across the country who would normally be in school? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I do want to mention there's one governor. She's one you don't hear about as much, but Governor Kim Reynolds of Iowa. And despite the fact that hers was the only state that allowed high school sports to continue throughout the summer with fans there, and they only had a few hiccups along the way, you don't hear about her much. But she has done that. And of course, she's been, in a sense, when she does get a media interview, she argues for this. She says, when you say it's not worth it, which is what a lot of people are saying, she says it's a false choice and that it's an intentional setup by the media to ask whether it's worth it. Because as I said, and in my discussion with Steve, it is a trade-off. She says, consider this from a different angle. Statistically, there's a higher degree of likelihood that a teacher or student will die in an automobile accident on the way to school than that they will contract and succumb to coronavirus. And she says, life does, actually, this piece about her says that life does involve risk. If parents feel the risk of traveling the roads is too great, they stay home with their kids. If they feel the risk of contracting a virus and dying is too great, they stay home with their kids. But that cannot be the responsibility of the governors and the superintendents and others. They need to provide an education for our children as sort of a contract that, we've made this thing happen. We've developed an education system. We've made our educational establishments do not only teaching of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also helping kids when they've got issues like ADD or speech problems, or if they are in the category that qualifies for school breakfasts and school lunches and sometimes even school dinners. There are so many things that our schools have made themselves responsible for that our education establishment has provided and is providing for kids. And to pull the rug out from under kids without, I know it's all the officials are being very thoughtful about it and trying to do the best they can. But I think you just have to remember that, yes, we are in a pandemic, and it's very contagious, and people are going to get sick, and some people are going to die, but very few children die, and children are losing months and could be years if we wait for a vaccine of education. And so, that has to be taken into consideration. And this is one quote from Governor Reynolds. She says, "I want the media to give the numbers in context. Help us, because I think you're part of the solution. We all have to be part of the solution. And you, especially if you're a governor, you have to be part of the solution. We need to put the numbers into context. When Iowans are out there, there is so much anxiety about the uncertainty and what the expectations are. We need to help them walk through that and not escalate the anxiety." And that's, in a sense, that is what's happening right now. There's so much anxiety because the dates are being moved, the capabilities are being changed, and I think they're getting better, especially the safety capabilities that are out there. So these are some things that we've got to look at as we decide whether or not we want to put our own kids in in-person school, or whether we want to advocate for in-person or online school. It's just a different world we live in right now, trying to educate kids and trying to help them through this rough time without them losing too much in terms of academic performance. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we will take your calls. I know some folks are calling in. We haven't been able to pick up on those lines, but we're going to continue on this topic of education. Laurie Higgins will be my guest, but we'll continue also to take your calls, because we want to know what you think about reopening schools, sending your kids back to school. Should teachers be back in the classroom? All of that. So stay with us for more of Point of View. We've got a lot more. We're talking about schools this hour of Point of View.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. You know, it's really impossible to ignore that there's a leftist bias in not only public school curriculum, a lot of private schools too, also just at the college level. It trickles on down, or actually floods down, even into the lower grades, and it's just there, and it's something we have to acknowledge, understand, and really warn, I think, about. With me to do that is Laurie Higgins, and she is with the Illinois Family Institute. She's cultural issues writer, and she's a commentator. She does radio and other outlets to basically get some of this information out there. She worked full-time for 8 years in Deerfield High School's Writing Center in Deerfield, Illinois. And her cultural commentaries have been carried on a number of pro-family websites. Laurie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Penna.
Well, it's good to have you. And your article, Education in a Pro-Propaganda Culture, folks, it's up at pointofview.net. You can find it, but it really hits the nail on the head in a sense and helps us to think about the situation out there in our schools. And it's amazing because you referenced a piece that I saw in the Wall Street Journal recently, and a professor, John Ellis, who's making a lot of sense, and we'll talk about that later. But just, you're a former teacher, so what's your experience with all this leftist propaganda in the schools?
Well, this has been very discouraging and frustrating because I came to work for IFI in 2008. I worked at Deerfield High School, which is in an affluent suburb, one of the best public schools in the state of Illinois. I worked there for a decade before that, and I encountered this in my district. So in professional development days, which are days like late arrival days, institute days, many community members ignore these. For years, every single one of our professional development was on critical race theory, which goes by different names, Teaching for Social Justice. Mm-hmm. It's everything that we're seeing now in the Antifa BLM riots that are infecting our streets, which is, it divides the public into who are the oppressors and who are the oppressed. And it robs minorities of a sense of agency in their own life, telling them their lot in life can't improve unless white people acknowledge their privilege and self-flagellate enough. In other words, say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so guilty for racist acts that I actually have never committed or even thought. So that has been infecting schools, colleges of education that train teachers. It has infected our teachers' unions, the Modern Language Association, the American Library Association, the field of library science. So it's pervasive. And even if you live in a conservative community, your younger teachers have come out of colleges of education and have been indoctrinated with this ideology, where they're not even presented with dissenting views. They don't even know what the criticism of critical race theory is. And so they're bringing it into the classroom.
They don't know what critical race theory is. They don't know that racism has become the measuring stick for everything. Right. They also, I think that this is also disturbing in a sense, and goes along with it. And that is, we're seeing teachers who are conservative or even just have sort of traditional values, and if they express an opinion to that effect, they're punished or ousted or worse.
And this is what I've been so frustrated about, because when I first started writing about this, I've been writing about specifically this since 2008 when I came to work for IFI, and I was dealing with it in my school district. I was writing to our school board because I had an interesting position there. I was both on staff, but I was also a parent. That's actually where I went to high school, where all four of my kids went to high school. So I was writing to the school board, to all the administrators, and I was saying, you know what, if we're going to introduce critical race theory to students, then, and even in professional development, we have a pedagogical obligation, an educational obligation to present other sides on how to think about racial issues, and also it was about sexuality and gender, all those issues. We have an obligation to present alternative resources so that kids can learn to think critically. You can't think critically when you've only presented one side of the debate and you've actually never even heard of the topic, and certainly not the other side. And for that, I became persona non grata in the school.
And this is back in 2008, 9, 10?
No, 2008 is when I came to work for Illinois Family Institute. It was the decade before that. It was the last 3 years that I was really addressing this hard in my school. And all I was asking for was for them to present dissenting resources. I wasn't saying get any of this critical race theory out of the schools. I was saying present alternative resources. Let us use other resources to critique the ideas, to have an exchange of ideas. And for that, I became persona non grata. But what I was trying to do was to say, people, community members, teachers here at Deerfield High School, speak out now, because soon we're not going to be able to. Yes, it was hard for me to speak out. I had people mad at me. I had people, they were so small and petty. People who had been my friends wouldn't say hello to me in the hall if we were the only two people and I said hello first. And these had been people who were my friends, who had my children in classes. They wouldn't sit in a room with me. So I'm not saying it's easy, but it would have been an easier time to do it than now. And if we continue our silence now, what we bequeath to our children and grandchildren is greater oppression and fewer liberties. And that's religious liberty, speech rights, assembly rights. And that's why people need to start speaking out now, even if it's hard.
It is hard. It takes actually courage right now. That's something that is, it's difficult to muster up. And Laurie, one thing that I'm disturbed about right now is, as we see things playing out in the streets across the country, and we see these demands for people to apologize for, say, being white or being too white or too successful or whatever. I'm very disturbed about that, but I see it infiltrating churches too, because you think that the people of the church would have more courage because they have Christ behind them and they have the Holy Spirit, but they're misinformed. So it's not that they're necessarily maybe not courageous, but they don't understand that this critical theory that's infiltrating the society is also infiltrating the church, and it's very dangerous. They don't get that, though.
Well, they don't get that it's dangerous. They don't understand the ideology. Their first encounter for most people is this, sound bites that they hear in the culture, and they don't read or think deeply about it. They don't know its origin. They don't know its, sort of Marxist communist origin. They can look up someone named Paulo Freire, which many people but his ideas were sort of foundational for this movement. But I would have to disagree with you. I do think there's a lack of courage among Christians, and I've seen it for many, many years. I saw it anecdotally at the high school. I, for example, had a colleague who was a born-again believer, the elder in his church, and he told me, because we were also dealing with a lot of pro-homosexual, very graphic material being taught in classes. And he said, Laurie, I agree with you on all this, the critical race theory. He said, but I'm a people pleaser, and I care what people think about what I wear. And so he wouldn't say anything. And so, I was left sort of floundering. There were born-again believers on faculty, and we've seen it all over. We have drag queen story hours. How many Christians, how many pastors in their communities go to their libraries and say anything? And the reason we've had critical race theory in our schools for many, many years now, and no one has said anything, and now it's very difficult, and they're not saying things. And I would say the view of many Christians today is they won't do anything unless they're guaranteed it's cost-free. But that's not Scripture, because we're told the world is going to hate us, Jesus said, because it hated him first. And then Christians will refuse to say things they should be saying, or they will say things they ought not say if the cost is having someone mad at them. And that's just not the walk that we were promised by Christ.
Yeah, I worry about the whole idea of safety. I don't like hearing it at church. We are, we're not opening because we want you to be safe. And,
safety has been redefined.
Yeah, and think about the early Christians and the courage. going into
Right.
pandemics and helping people at the risk of their own lives.
I mean, the problem with this redefinition of safety is deeper. I mean, I think on a visceral level, people react differently to illness, but the safety has been redefined to mean comfort. So even comfort with exposure to ideas. So that's what you'll hear in schools now. If there's an idea that someone claims makes them uncomfortable, they don't even say that anymore. They say, I feel unsafe.
Yeah, the right to not be offended, the right to be safe.
Right.
Listen, I got to jump in, Laurie, but I'm glad you're with us for the next segment. We'll be right back with more of Point of View. Stay with us.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
My guest is Laurie Higgins from Illinois Family Institute, and we're talking about indoctrination in schools. Actually, the indoctrination is not just in schools, but that's what we're sort of focusing on today. She's written an article. It's really good. I recommend it. It's at pointofview.net. Education in a pro-propaganda culture. And Laurie, when you look at this, you say in the article that leftists, I just got a staple there, demand absolute autonomy and arrogate to themselves the right to indoctrinate other people's children because they have unilaterally concluded that their political and moral beliefs are objectively true and opposing views are false. Used to be, Laurie, that the the campus, the college campus, allowed opposing views, a discussion of ideas. But you say from kindergarten on up, leftists are indoctrinating other people's children with their arguable leftist beliefs on homosexuality, opposite sex impersonation, race, sex, American history, and presidential politics with no negative repercussions. So we've lost, in a sense, I don't know if we can get it back, we've lost the argument that there should be a debate. There's just one side now, right, Laurie?
Absolutely. I mean, I had a colleague in the English department say it directly to me. We were sitting together, and we both worked in the writing center, and she said to me that she was so convinced that my views on homosexuality were wrong, that they shouldn't be allowed to be spoken in the high school and no resources presented, not even something for, I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Robert George. He's a Princeton law professor, has written eloquently on marriage, still does, and
he's
homosexuality. Right, exactly.
Amazing.
Nothing can be. And this is the arrogance of teachers, even teachers who present themselves as very humble and, value diversity and foster open dialogue. That's their views. Their views are correct, and no other views can be spoken, no resources presented to kids on certain topics. On certain topics, yes, but on the issue of homosexuality or opposite sex impersonation or how to think about race or feminist topics, there's only one side, and we're starting this now in kindergarten, including on sexuality. So, it used to be at the college level, then it filtered down into the high schools and middle schools, and now it's from kindergarten on. I mean, a number of states, including Illinois, passed a law where they have to present homosexuality and opposite sex impersonation positively starting in kindergarten.
Great. What do parents, Laurie, you've been looking at this forever, and you've been a parent yourself. I had my kids in homeschool, private Christian schools, and some public school. And I feel like they're adults now. Their life experience and some indoctrination that my husband and I did helped them to kind of understand what they were being presented with. But I don't know if that's even possible anymore. What do you think?
When I first started at IFI, I was very committed to trying to get parents involved in schools. I still am there because I think it's a stewardship issue. Our taxes are supporting this teaching, paying the salaries of these teachers and administrators, but I do think parents need to get their kids out of public schools. I think the indoctrination now is at such young ages. It's so pervasive. You will get no help, even if you have conservative administrators and faculty members. They're as cowardly as Christians are out, the parents in the community. I don't think that and we have laws passed. And if you see laws passed in one state, like we have, it started in California, and then I think it went to New Jersey, a law, I call it the LGBT school indoctrination bill. It's going to spread to other states. And once you see that, and it's at kindergarten, you don't have you can't even opt your kids out. It used to be, there was going to be one teaching through an anti-bullying program, and you could opt your child out, or they were going to teach one offensive play, and you could opt your child out. But now it permeates everything. And at all ages. No kindergartner should be introduced to anything about homosexuality or opposite sex impersonation. They shouldn't be taught about gender identity in kindergarten, not even hear it mentioned. My grandkids, my oldest grandchildren now are 10 and 9, that's 3 of them. They're all homeschooled, they're in different states, and none of them have heard about homosexuality or opposite sex impersonation, and they shouldn't.
Right.
So that's why I don't think... What
about the racial issues? Because, for instance, I noticed even in Chicago, in Illinois, where your state is, there's a lawmaker that wants to cancel history classes until a suitable alternative can be found. And we have this whole 1619 project, which says that America started in 1619, and that we're just
and
based on slavery, and that we're just totally a slave nation that defines us.
Right.
So, these are tied together, all of these different areas of sexuality and race and all of it.
Right. Those are the topics. When you hear about, diversity, that's all it really means is race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. That's all it really means. It doesn't mean all forms of ideas that exist in the world. And yes, we have a representative here in Illinois who just 2 weeks ago or a week ago, proposed an amendment to a silly bill that he also proposed, and the amendment would cancel all history classes until such time as all textbooks can be reviewed. Obviously, it's reviewed to see if they're sufficiently woke. And in the meantime, he wants to teach civics, which is how to be politically engaged. Well, but there's no definition, there's no criteria. He says that all of our textbooks are unfair and are miseducating our students on women, opposite sex impersonators, and homosexuals, and blacks. And so, but he doesn't give any criteria for determining whether something is unfair. He thinks we are currently using textbooks written a century ago or centuries ago. He doesn't believe that white people can write about blacks. So I don't know if that means he thinks blacks can't write about whites. I suspect not, that's not what he means. And so this is on these really inflammatory cultural issues. Schools are indoctrinating, and the reason they're doing it is they know that it's easier to indoctrinate a 15-year-old than a 25-year-old, and easier still to indoctrinate a 5-year-old. They're very ideologically malleable, and their emotions get played into these issues, and the left uses that, and we don't. And so, I mean, I think there are parents that cannot afford existing private schools, and they can't homeschool because both parents must work or there's only one parent, which is why churches must step in and either make funds available so parents can send their kids to existing private schools or create affordable private schools. And they should have started planning for that 10 years ago.
Yeah, and so COVID has thrown another whole monkey wrench into it, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, it could be an opportunity. That's what we're going to discuss with Lindsey Burke later. But Laurie, at this point, it's so interesting. It's almost ironic that parents are dying to get their kids back into the schools. And I think the schools, I mean, they just have an obligation to open. But, you know, the fact that they're often closed and they're not able to indoctrinate, I guess, is a silver lining, isn't it?
Well, it is, and there's also been a lot of stuff revealed through this, like what the things the teachers' unions are demanding are so outrageous and so irrelevant to education. And there's also some stuff coming out about how teachers don't really want parents to see what's going on in the classroom. I'm going to be writing an article on that because, as I've said, they value their autonomy. They value parents not hearing what they're saying in the classroom.
Okay, well, that sounds like a great topic for another interview, Laurie. On that note, since we're just about at the end of the hour, thank you so much for sending me the article. I hope you'll send me the next one so we can have you back on and talk about it.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for your good work. That's Laurie Higgins from the Illinois Family Institute. And, you know, sometimes these organizations that are conservative in the states, they get some quality work and people there with them, and they have an influence that goes way beyond their state, and that's Laurie. So thanks, Laurie, and we'll be right back.
About important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. We've been majoring on education today here on Point of View. And, the whole country seems to be thinking about schools right now more than we normally would here in August when kids are about to go back. Because some kids aren't going back. Some are going to be still online. In fact, many schools are trying to figure out what to do. Parents are trying to figure out what to do because some of them need to be back at work and yet their kids may be at home. So there are all sorts of things swirling around with regard to schools. And I think one thing that's happened is parents have learned a lot about what's going on at school that they didn't know. We're going to talk about that with our guest and maybe a silver lining to this whole COVID lockdown of schools that could portend well for educational reform. But I want to introduce to the microphone Lindsey Burke. And Lindsey Burke is at the Heritage Foundation. She's been there overseeing the research and policy on issues pertaining to preschool all the way through 12th grade and even higher education. And she is in the media. She writes. She's interviewed for many publications and also radio and television outlets. And she basically thinks a lot about choice, school choice, and also just education savings accounts and just other mechanisms for school reform. She's got her PhD from George Mason University. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you. And, I first want to ask you because it's become sort of an economic issue that schools may not open right away. Some are delaying. For instance, I'm in Dallas, and the Dallas School District is opening September 8th, partially in person, which is kind of amazing for a big city. But many others are just keeping everything online. And this has become an economic issue, and we can look to other countries and see what they're doing. What do we find?
You're right. It has become an economic issue. The school reopening question really is intimately intertwined with this question of overall economic recovery. There are many families who do rely on that school reopening to go to work day to day. These essential workers who have sent their children into public schools. And that's something that is going to continue to be an issue moving forward when we see these large school districts continue to keep their doors closed to in-person instruction. We know, based on research from Dan Lips at the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity, that about 70 out of 120 large school districts have said that they are going to be closed to in-person instruction as the school year kicks off this year. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of students, if not more than 1 million students across the country, just from that set of school districts who we know won't have that in-person option. And yet, when we look around the globe, we see most countries around the world have reopened schools. Some, like Sweden, never closed schools to begin with and have navigated this situation quite nicely. We know, thankfully, that children have a very low likelihood of contracting and passing on the virus, which, of course, is good news and bodes well overall for school reopening.
So, Lindsey, we do have teachers. It seems like these people are given publicity to, and in a sense, they're demonized, which I kind of feel bad about because they're literally, some of them are literally scared. But I also think that teachers unions are stirring the pot with regard to the danger for teachers going back.
Yeah, that's right. And one can certainly sympathize and should sympathize with teachers who might be concerned. Teachers who are on or a little bit older, perhaps, might be concerned about their health if they reenter physical spaces. And so that is understandable. But you make a really important distinction there, which is the distinction between teachers and these teachers' unions who purport to represent their interests. And unfortunately, we have seen a lot of politics being played by the teachers union in this moment of crisis that we're in. It ranges from things like submitting fake obituaries to newspapers and holding die-ins to other more sort of practical political demands that have nothing to do with this question of the safety of school reopening. The Los Angeles Teachers Union has demanded that before they bless school reopenings in that city, that the city continue a moratorium on charter schools, that they implement Medicaid for all, that they raise taxes, that they defund the police. So things that have very little, if anything, to do with this question of school reopening. And so we continue to see the unions really using this pandemic, unfortunately, as a bargaining chip.
Dr. Lindsey Burke is with me from Heritage Foundation. And ladies and gentlemen, the lines are open, 800-351-1212. If you have a question for her about schools reopening, and also if you're a parent who has perhaps learned some things or has some challenges now that schools are or are not reopening, we'd love to hear about that. But Lindsey, I do want to ask you, because I've read a lot of what you've written about the pods and the little pod platoons. And what has happened now is parents who had this whole spring with their kids at home learned a lot. And they, it's amazing the creativity that parents have in order to get their kids educated. So they're coming up with, if they've got to go back to work, they're coming up with ways to form these pods with other families. Can you describe this? And
I just love it that there's a bright spot in the midst of this pandemic. It really is. It is something that is so quintessentially American, families coming together, civil society responding in such a robust and quick way. Basically, what we're seeing are families across the country and neighborhoods across the country pooling together resources, sort of putting their kids together in small clusters. So those could be kids ages maybe 4 to 18, pulling those kids together in groups of maybe 10 or so students, and then hiring a teacher to come in and teach that pod, or a private tutor to come provide instruction. And so paying that tutor or that teacher out of pocket, providing that academic experience for those children, and providing the socialization experience that so many kids are longing for right now as well. So it's really just been amazing to see.
So there's a sense in which, and I think a lot of families across America during the lockdowns or after the lockdowns, after things are opening up, they found people who they would be with. And, in a sense, you knew how careful those people were being, how much they were traveling. So those are your people you hang with. And that is the principle with these kids. They're together. Their families kind of are together on things. And then that teacher also is, paid to be with them and to stay somewhat, COVID-free if possible, too. So you've got this group and trusting each other. And it's almost like the one-room schoolhouse concept.
That's right. And so the kids are sort of co-quarantining, and the teacher or private tutor is basically co-quarantining more or less with this pod, with these groups of families. And it is, quite a few people have pointed that out, that it is reminiscent of the one-room schoolhouse in a way. I think it was the Washington Post that had called this the sort of 21st century rendition of the one-room schoolhouse. It's really just amazing to see.
It really is. We're going to talk a little bit more about why those need to be encouraged. We'll be right back with Lindsey Burke.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
At Adam Mill argues that if social media wants to play doctor, they should prepare to be sued for malpractice. He has a point. It involves the frequent debate about the effectiveness of using hydroxychloroquine. Its use got political once the president talked about it during one of the coronavirus task force briefings. Doctors and researchers can debate how safe and effective it might be, and we can leave that debate for another conversation. The real question is why social media would pull a video about it. Do these social media outlets have doctors evaluating medical procedures? And when they argue that using this drug is dangerous, aren't they speaking outside of their expertise? Last month, a video from a press conference of doctors was censored because one of the doctors said that she had treated over 300 COVID-19 patients using the therapy, including vulnerable patients who all improved. Facebook pulled the video that already had 14 million views. YouTube and Twitter followed suit, arguing that it violated their social media platforms. They're free to pull a video, but the social media explanations for why they did so raise important questions. They said that the medical testimony in the video could not be allowed because, number one, the treatment doesn't work, and number two, the treatment is dangerous. The obvious question to ask is whether these censorship decisions are being reviewed and approved by actual physicians. If the video is true, then other patients with the virus could be saved by the medical testimony. If the information in the video is false, then the correct response would be a rebuttal from licensed physicians and medical researchers. We have come to expect censorship on social media platforms. Censoring medical information and testimony from doctors and physicians is one step further. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. Lindsey Burke is with me. She's director of the Center for Education Policy at the Heritage Foundation. We've got a couple of folks calling in. Let's take a call from Jeff in Arizona. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for calling in.
Hi. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
I just wanted to point out that I believe, they are politicizing this, but they've been doing it for a long, long time. Our school teachers, we need to take advantage of this and really make some changes. Our country has the worst schools in the whole world, and we let it off the hook.
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing you now, Jeff, but I've got the point. Lindsey Burke, it is an opportunity, isn't it?
It is an opportunity, and there have been problems with the existing model of K-12 education delivery for decades, closer to a century. And this is something that will not change unless we start empowering parents with control over the resources that we currently spend. The U.S. spends about $700 billion per year on K-12 education, and for the most part, parents have very little say in how those dollars are spent and the types of education providers they direct those funds to. And so that has really put district systems in a pretty enviable position of near monopolists, and has meant that they have not really had to respond to the needs of families and to figure out if the school and the education that they're providing is the right fit for a particular child.
You hear people saying now, well, if you're not going to open the school and, we're still funding the schools, there's something wrong here. And I think this is an opportunity to make that case, Lindsey, for more school choice type programs.
Yeah, I mean, states right now should be providing emergency education savings accounts to families. That would be the number one thing states could do to make sure that children have educational continuity in whatever setting it is that meets their needs, and to really help families as well. We talked earlier about the economic imperative of reopening schools. And so what states should do is they should allow families to take a portion of the money that would have been spent on a child in that child's district school and have those dollars put directly into an education savings account. This is something Arizona has done for over 5 years now, as has Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi, and North Carolina. And in those states, if you look at Arizona, you get 90% of what the state would have spent on a child in the public schools. That's about $6,000 per year on average. It goes into an ESA, an education savings account that parents control. And then at that point, they can spend it on private school tuition if they want, or they don't even have to enter a brick and mortar school, right? We're talking about pods. ESAs would support a pod option. They can hire private tutors, pay for online courses. They can purchase curricula and textbooks. If a child needs special education therapists, they can pay for that as well. And so it allows ESA allow a family to completely customize their child's educational experience. That's what states should be doing to reform the funding of K-12 education.
How optimistic are you that we'll make progress?
Well, I think this pandemic has demonstrated more than at any other time how much an inflexible funding system of K-12 education really gets in the way, or at least isn't nimble enough to address problems that arise from crises like this. No one would have predicted 6 months ago that there would be a global pandemic that would have state and governments forcing schools and businesses across the country to shut their doors. I mean, we were talking about in March, when this really hit in earnest in the U.S., 55 million children who all of a sudden their school doors were closed to them to in-person instruction. And for so many kids, that remains the case this fall. And part of the problem, the reason families have not had access to education, regardless of where that is taking place, is because those dollars aren't nimble. They fund districts. The district school doors are largely closed, and families just don't have recourse at the moment to go in and grab those dollars, to access them, and to direct them to learning options of choice that are open.
Let's take another quick call. Let's go to Ohio. Dale listening on WGGN. Hi, Dale. What's your comment?
I think it'd be a great time to abolish public schools altogether. They're ridiculous.
Okay, well, yeah, we've got an expert in schools, and Lindsay, I don't know if that would even be possible. What do you think?
Well, I think so. I get the sentiment, certainly. I think what we want to do is to reconceptualize what public education means, right? We need to redefine what we mean by public education. In my mind, public education does not mean prioritizing or favoring one type of schools, which is what we do now, right? We use public funding to fund a system of district government-run schools. What public education should mean is providing the financing to the public to allow them to access an education option of choice. And this is something Milton Friedman said all the way back in 1955, that yes, let's provide the public financing of education, but separate that financing from the delivery of services and allow any provider to provide that education to families that's the right fit for their children.
So, you know, we mentioned that COVID has been sort of shined a light on what's going on in schools. Some parents, you know, as they got more involved with the online learning, they found out that their children were being indoctrinated into things they didn't agree with. Christian parents are finding that, you know, maybe being apprised of the necessity of getting a Christian education for their child. That's been a problem with federal dollars sometimes. So what do you think about that? I mean, we did have a good Supreme Court decision recently, right?
Yeah, we did. And look, this is, I would say, another one of those silver linings, right? If we're looking for the silver lining in this pandemic, it has given parents the opportunity to really examine what their children are learning in their child's public school, to take the time to delve in deep and to look at what they're learning. And This could be anything from what you mentioned just now to civics education. There's great dissatisfaction right now with the state of civics education in the U.S. We see things like the 1619 Project, which many schools across the country are adopting and parents have expressed concerns with. And so this really is an opportunity for for parents to take a step back and to really look at the curriculum that their public schools are using. And when things do start back up, when we resume sort of normal operations down the road, and we have things like school board meetings and curriculum fairs and textbook adoption fairs, parents really need to make their voices heard, talk about what they have learned over the past few months with regard to what their children are learning in their classrooms, and really be a part of the conversation about curriculum.
This has been so long and so painful for many families, or at least so revealing, that I don't think parents would drop this when schools start. There's just too much emotion, and your children's well-being is at stake.
Well, this is something that I think is so interesting just from a research perspective, is the extent to which parents will continue to use these alternative arrangements, or will we see most return to the traditional model, which works for some, but of course not for all. Just to put a point on it, if you look pre-pandemic at the number of children across the country who were homeschooling, so before the pandemic hit, families who were already choosing to homeschool, it was about 3% of the K-12 school-age population, so about 1.8 million children in the U.S. were homeschooling. So I think that number is important just for us to have in the back of our head so that we can, as we watch what happens over the next year or 2 years, get a sense for how permanent this increase in whether we call it homeschooling or microschooling or pandemic pods might be. Who knows, right, what will ultimately unfold. I don't think anybody could really predict right now what it might end up being ultimately. But, even if that number just went up to 6%, that would mean a doubling of the number of families who are homeschooling their children, which I think many would argue is a good thing to see.
I think so, too. And I think the extent to which there's some changes made so that the dollars can begin following the kids will help encourage people to either homeschool or find some kind of hybrid homeschooling that, meets their family's needs, or maybe continue in the pod. Lindsey, there's so much to talk about. Please keep us posted if there's any policies that arise that sound good to you. We'd love to hear about it here on Point of View. We know you'll write about it, and I follow the Daily Signal, so I'm sure I'll see. But thank you so much for your time today and for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
That's Lindsey Burke. She's at the Heritage Foundation. I might mention you can go to pointofview.net. Her piece for the Daily Signal on pandemic pods is up there. It talks about how it's reshaping K through 12 and also how the financing needs to begin to follow that. Next up, Tim Winter from Parents Television Council is going to join me, and some interesting, provocative, a terrible television show that needs to be jettisoned. We'll talk with him after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kirby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. You know, with months of lockdowns, I imagine for most families, television, in some senses, has been your friend more than ever. But there have been some challenges for TV, one being the sex scenes, which we'll talk about with our next guest, and another being just the, well, let me just introduce my guest, Tim Winter, as president of the Parents Television Council. He spent time with NBC, also with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. He knows whereof he speaks. And now he's trying to protect families from some of the worst of television. Tim, thank you so much for joining me.
Penna, good afternoon to you and to your listeners from beautiful downtown Burbank, as Johnny Carson used to call it.
Oh my goodness! You always when I have you on, I always miss California because that's where I grew up, and I miss the weather. But there are a lot of things about it I don't miss. Tim, I want to talk about this. Was early on in the COVID lockdowns where I saw a piece came from you. COVID concerns force Hollywood to rethink sex scenes, and of course the production schedules have been blown up and. You've seen broadcasts from home, a lot of different things going on in people's kitchens. But so that's been a couple of the challenges. But another one was the sex scenes. And it's something I never would have thought about, but it's certainly an issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that here at a time when more families, more Americans, more people around the world are turning to electronic entertainment to fill their time, whether it's television or, Netflix or some of the streaming media, Facebook, who knows. But one of the things that Hollywood is struggling with during the lockdown and continuing actually even still, the social distancing requirements have shut down a lot of their production. And for the productions that are taking place, it is throwing them a little bit of a curveball because they can't film intimate scenes, sex scenes, a couple in bed or whatever, because of the requirement for social distancing. And so it's forcing them to figure out a different way to display intimacy, which, we've been scratching our heads for a while saying, hey, the way we used to show intimacy on television 30, 40 years ago, adults still knew what was going on without showing naked people in bed. It was an understanding of, just the understanding of what was going on perhaps was even more engaging with the viewer than showing the folks in the throes of the act. So it's interesting to hear my friends in Hollywood now struggling with this very issue, how to film those scenes.
So is there any kind of a recognition that perhaps it's more appealing to have the suggestive relationship rather than the graphic relationship?
Well, there was an interesting article in the New York Times several weeks ago that talked about how some of the young writers in Hollywood are coming up with this brand new concept of, hey, maybe it's sexier not to show it. I'm like, well, that's not such a new idea. But I hope that this is something that the creative community in Hollywood will rediscover and apply. Sadly, their behavior suggests otherwise. If you look back over the years, once the social distancing goes away, the social distancing on a set will probably go away, and that's unfortunate.
It is. I mean, I'm thinking of families right now because during the lockdowns, families are watching TV together a lot of times, and so that's even harder to, basically it's a little embarrassing when mom and dad and kids are all there in the room. So you're either going to turn it off, the parents are going to get wise to what's out there a little bit more. And so, sometimes it's about money, and I would just hope that some parents, some of these media execs would begin to see it might be even more lucrative to have something that's a little bit more appealing to the whole family.
You'd think so. I mean, if for most
you
of
sound
the
skeptical.
Studios, well, yeah, most of the Hollywood studios are part of a publicly traded corporation, and you'd think that they would be wanting to maximize their the return on their investments. And one way to do it is to maximize the audience. And what they have done routinely over, year after year is to carve away even more of their audience because people are so assaulted or insulted by what they're seeing on the screen. So I do hope that this is something that lasts.
Yeah, I just think of my own experience over the years of just kind of TV, for the most part, is just not appealing to me anymore because it's so dangerous.
You're not alone. More and more parents are trying to find alternative solutions for their entertainment choices, and sadly, there are very few that really are 100% family friendly. There are some that are out there. We want to celebrate them. We want to push them, promote them, but you'd think that some of these big, multi-billion-dollar corporations would want to be more successful financially and therefore reach out to the widest possible audience. They don't.
They don't. Well, one thing I do appreciate about the Parents Television Council over the years is you've always subjected yourselves to, watching and analyzing what's out there. And of course, it's more confusing now with streaming and everything else. And there is a lot that pushes a lot of envelopes and offends people. But when you come to one that's the worst of the worst, that's when, we can't talk about everyone on this broadcast, but when we come to one that is just so bad, that's when I, usually call you because we need to know about it and parents need to understand what's out there. So this one, and I think you've got a plan to try to get this removed, but it's 365 days. Tell us about it.
365 Days is a movie that is billed as a romance, a love story, but it's tragic when you think about the story that it's actually telling and what it's promoting. You have a gang member, a drug kingpin, who is a hunky, gorgeous, good-looking guy, and he kidnaps a young woman, sexually assaults her, and forces her into bondage. Basically, he gives her 365 days to fall in love with him. And it is a movie that we believe romanticizes rape, sexual assault, sexual trafficking, bondage. It glamorizes them. By romanticizing it, it desensitizes us. If you think about what could sex traffickers possibly do to help themselves, well, you create an entertainment culture that celebrates the things that they're doing, and that's exactly what this film does. It's being distributed on Netflix, and we are waging a brand new campaign calling on Netflix to remove a show that glamorizes and romanticizes sexual assault and sexual trafficking.
Listen, there is such an outcry right now against sexual trafficking across the country that, I would just love to see people get on board with this. So you make it easy for people to make their voice heard, don't you?
Yeah, there's a petition circulating. Actually, it's internationally. There's a Welsh pop singer from Wales who actually has spoken up about this. There's a change.org petition on this, trying to get folks to sign that petition, get it taken off the air, and we're channeling that. We're also going to be personally holding the board of directors of Netflix personally to account. These are men and women who profit from Netflix and who are on its board of directors. It's controlling governance board, and we want to make sure that they are held to account. I don't think they want to feel any pressure, public pressure, about sponsoring rape and sexual trafficking as something to be romanticized. If we can hold them publicly to account, then we hope Netflix will do the right thing. We've seen them do this in the past with the suicide drama, 13 Reasons Why,
yes,
where we reached out and after reaching out to the board of directors, all of a sudden that graphic suicide scene was edited out. And it was years in the making, but once the board felt the heat, then they said to the management, you know what, we have to, I don't want to be held personally accountable for this. So that's what we think is the path to success in this campaign.
So you're going from two directions, of course. There's just the public outcry, but you, Tim, have developed relationships in Hollywood, and I think there's a sense of respect for you there because you pick your battles, don't you?
Well, we have to pick our battles very carefully. I mean, we can be angry at a lot of things, but I think precision matters. And Hollywood certainly gives us plenty of targets to shoot at. But if we can prove to be successful in small numbers, being very precise, hopefully that leads us to success in the broader scope as well. And there is so much going on in Hollywood right now that we see as harmful to children. I don't know if you just saw this most recently.
Let me jump in and let you kind of describe and delineate some of those after the break. I want to open the phones too at 800-351-1212 if you have a question or comment about something on TV for Tim Winter of Parents Television Council. 800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Thanks for sticking with us for Point of View. Tim Winter from Parents Television Council is my guest. And Tim, just thinking about 365 days and, its emphasis and sort of glamorization or glorification of sex trafficking and rape. And right now is a time when we're thinking about slavery, and this is modern day slavery. So, we have that, and, with children and just the Me Too movement and all of that. So this is something coming out of Hollywood. I think you can make a real case that this is just not the movie for our time, is it?
This is a time in the world where over 4 million adults and 1 million children around the world are victims of forced
sexual exploitation. And when you think about a problem, a human problem challenge as large as that, perhaps we shouldn't become accustomed to being entertained by that very type of conduct in a movie.
Absolutely. So I'm glad that Parents Television Council is taking such strong action. And ladies and gentlemen, you can go to pointofview.net and click through. You'll see Tim's picture and bio, and you can find the website and find a lot out about what's going on in entertainment and what Parents Television Council is doing about it. Or it's just parentstelevisioncouncil.org, Tim?
ParentsTV.org. Yep,
Okay,
ParentsTV.org.
Tim, one thing I remember, because I've been around Point of View a long time, and in the early days, I remember we used to bring Parents Television Council on, not only to find out what we should stay away from, but what should we be watching? What's wholesome out there? Is there anything?
Well, there are good wholesome things out there. They seem to be more difficult to find than the explicit content, the explicit shows, but there are good things out there. We look at family-friendly TV networks like the Up Network, INSP, which was formerly called Inspiration, and our good services, streaming services, an alternative to Netflix is called PureFlix. I'm sure you're aware of PureFlix, and they have good content, safe and family friendly. There are good folks out there, not just in Hollywood but around the country, who are trying to fill the void, the huge market void of that so many families are hungry for something positive to watch with their families. And it's interesting. There are some cable networks that have recognized. Look at the cooking shows. Look at some of the home improvement shows. These are networks that do particularly well in the ratings, and it's usually something that the whole family can enjoy together. Usually, every once in a while, you see some crude language, which is unfortunate and wholly unnecessary. But by and large, some of those reality shows are actually very watchable.
I've always thought that the rise of reality TV, in one sense, can be explained, of course, that our natural curiosity that we like to just see how people live, but sometimes it's so boring because it's, there's no plot line or anything, and so it's a little more monotonous, but still it's interesting to people, and, it can be very wholesome. In fact, it's probably more often than not fairly wholesome.
There's the way the so-called reality TV shows work. It's they can say it's reality because it's based on people who are not actors and there's no writing that really involved. But they do go into the edit room after stuff is shot and they tell a story. One of the more famous reality shows was Duck Dynasty, and what the Robertson family found out after the fact, they hadn't actually sat down together to watch an episode that they were featured on. They realized that the producers were inserting bleeps into their dialogue, suggesting there was profanity, when in fact there was no profanity, but the producers were inserting bleeps to create the impression of profanity.
Really?
So even the reality stuff, sometimes it's really not, it's conjured up because someone in Hollywood still wants to be edgy or push in some sort of an envelope. Again, unnecessarily. I think you could have as much of an audience without those bleeps as you have with them.
Something else that you, I know, take very seriously at Parents Television Council is violence in the media. It's not just pushing the envelope sexually or with regard to some of these horrible crimes, but actual violence, which is a problem in our country, especially right now. And so how successful are you there?
Well, there's been 70 years of scientific evidence that has linked the violence that a child consumes in the media to their conduct, to their behavior, to their belief system. And some folks in Hollywood try to say, well, there is no real connection. Well, they don't tell their advertisers that there's no impact by watching a show, because the whole advertising is based on changing the behavior of the viewer. So violence is one of our core concerns. The sex of violence, the profanity, the disrespect for authority, the increasing sexualization, and now, sadly, sexualization of children being sexualized. before the break, I was going to say, did you hear about that Trolls doll situation where you have a doll for 5-year-old girls that has a button in the genital area, and if you push it, she giggles and moans, and Hasbro was forced to take it off the shelf. Well, how could Hasbro ever put a product like that on the shelf? Well, it's just another example of how children are being grotesquely sexualized in the entertainment media, including in toys.
Wow. No, I did not know about that toy. I guess I'm far enough away from having little kids, but that's pretty disturbing. Also, profanity. I mean, it's offensive, and there have always been standards with regard to profanity. Where do they lie right now?
Well, on broadcast television, it is still illegal to use certain words. But when you go to cable or to the streaming media platforms, there is no regulatory authority. It's because broadcasters use the publicly owned airwaves. They have to get a license to broadcast. That's the major TV networks. But once you go to the subscription services, those rules do not apply. So it's two different standards, one for broadcast and one for all the other distribution platforms. Parents really have to be careful. We've seen a sharp, marked increase in profane words, not on the broadcast networks as much, although still a lot of potty talk, but especially on the streaming platforms where the harshest profanity is rated as appropriate for children to watch. And it shows, again, just how incorrect the rating systems are. But it also shows Hollywood's propensity to push that kind of language onto it's not just adults, but children and families too.
Well, if we think that this does not affect people's behavior, we only need to look to the streets of our largest cities across the country right now to see the violence. And certainly there's a lot of imitation with regard to language. So I'm so glad you're out there, Tim. Thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for joining me today.
Always a pleasure, Penna. Anytime.
All right. Tim Winter, Parents Television Council. Again, it's parentstv.org. Parentstv.org. It's also linked at pointofview.net. So it's a great tool, ladies and gentlemen, for you. And I think during this time of a little bit more TV watching that's been taking place lately, it's needed because we just can't get away with it, it seems. I'm grateful for the summer that there's a little bit more outdoor, and certainly my state, Texas, is opening up. Hope yours does soon. Hope you enjoyed today's program, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've given you some food for thought, especially with regard to what is happening and what positive things can happen in the area of education. So stick with us. Kirby will be back tomorrow on Friday. We'll have our weekend edition. I'll be back in here with Kelly and Kirby. I want to thank you, Andrew, and now Doug, for your work. And also, Steve, thanks so much for putting these programs together. And Karen, doing the online work. Appreciate everything you do, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great night. God bless you.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.